You want to talk about country music? George Strait is known as the king of country. He got that title because he had hit songs for decades in a row. When you have the record for the most #1 hits in country music history with 60 songs at the top, you've pretty much made sure everyone knows you're one of the greatest, if not the greatest, country music artist to ever live on Earth. George Strait put everything he had into music, giving his all to shape the very heart of the genre. How a man who loved country music so much got to a point where he decided to quit music made millions of fans ask lots of questions. Stay with us as we uncover the sad moments and the hidden struggles that led to the real reason George Strait quit music. There's another side to the king of country that you and probably most fans don't know about, which is the early years before he became a name you can look up online. And thousands of websites would pop up saying one thing or another about who he had become. Before he was selling over 120 million records around the world and becoming one of the best-selling music artists of all time. George was the son of a middle school math teacher who was raising his 2 sons to take over the family's 2,000-acre ranch. It was in high school that George started to explore other hobbies by picking up the guitar, which was lucky because George was a cowboy through and through and loved everything about being one. If he hadn't picked up music, he would still have enjoyed a great life on his ranch, and we would have missed out on amazing music. In the early 1970s, George was planning to join the Army. Around the same time, he was also working on getting married to Norma, a woman who would go on to play a huge part in the success story that was being written. George had met Norma during his time at Pearl High School. He had gathered the courage to ask her out, but their first date didn't work out, and there was no second date. However, George realized that Norma was something special. So he reached out again, and they began dating. He would later say that she was the first girl he ever loved. George and Norma married across the border in Mexico. And later, in December of the following year, they held a formal ceremony to make their families happy. Together, they started a family living a quiet, steady life of service in Hawaii, a posting he had gotten by pure luck. When asked where he wanted to be stationed, George jokingly answered Hawaii, thinking it was impossible. To his complete surprise, his request was granted, and he found himself sent to the beautiful Hawaiian Islands while living in Hawaii. George discovered his deep connection to music after listening to an album by the legendary country artist Merle Haggard. The album was called a tribute to the best damn fiddle player in the world, and honored Western swing legend Bob Wills. This tribute album got George more devoted to the music of Bob Wills, and this increased his own commitment to singing. To start his journey, he bought a cheap guitar and a songbook filled with the works of the legendary Hank Williams. Luckily for him, it was as if the universe was waiting for him to make that important leap. It just so happened that around this time, his base commander decided to form an Army-sponsored country band called Ramblin' Country to entertain the troops. He gave people a chance to try out for the lead singer role, and George won the position. This was the start of something good, or so it seemed. In addition to a growing career, George and Norma welcomed their first child in Hawaii. Their daughter Jennifer was a blessing to the young couple. However, taking care of a baby came with its challenges, and the new parents were forced to return to Texas, where George went back to college to get a degree in agriculture. Clearly, George had written down ranching as a full-time career to support his family. Still, he kept music alive and even took the step to join a local group of his fellow college students. Together, they formed the Ace in the Hole Band, which made its debut in October 1975 at the Cheatham Street Warehouse in San Marcos, Texas. They quickly became regular performers at local clubs, playing their style of traditional country and Western swing. They earned barely enough, but kept doing it because they felt lucky to be able to play genuine country music to an audience that appreciated it. The band soon got some recognition and was able to record several songs for a small, independent record label. But despite this obvious step in the right direction, it was also the first situation that almost made George quit music. The songs the band had recorded for the record label didn't do so well. And George had started working on his family's ranch during the day to earn extra money, which he definitely needed at the time because he and his wife were expecting their second child. Bubba, the responsibility of being a father to 2 young kids was huge. And George desperately needed his music career to move to the next level as quickly as possible. However, when George took his music to the home of country music, Nashville refused to accept him. The resistance he met in the industry said his voice was too country for the mainstream. Fancy executives told him that traditional country was finished, that the world no longer wanted his style of music. Being told he had no future made George doubt his own abilities. George was so affected by the rejection in Nashville that he was in the process of quitting music. He had told his Ace in the Hole members that he had started planning to take a full-time job with a company in Uvalde that designed cattle pens. George was ready to let it all go, but that was until Norma said no. She had seen how her husband did without music and knew the idea of giving up on his dream was killing him. Knowing how passionate George was about music, she encouraged him to give his dream one more chance. She told him to give his dream one more year before making a final decision. Thankfully, Norma gave her husband every bit of support he needed after he contacted the Uvalde company and told them he would not be taking the position. He kept playing with his band and was working on getting back on Nashville's radar. The only connection George had to Nashville was his friend Irv Woolsey, who owned a bar where the Ace in the Hole performed. Woolsey had worked for a big record label before opening his bar. It was he who convinced some people from Nashville to come to Texas and hear George and his band play. But even though they admitted that they liked the music, they still felt that the Western swing sound wasn't popular enough to be worth the effort. That rejection didn't stop George. He himself went on many trips to Nashville, trying to get a record deal, and met rejection after rejection. Record labels wanted the polished pop country sound at the time. Eventually, a major label, MCA, signed George to a record contract in February 1981. The terms were that they would start with just one song and, if the song did well, they would think about making an album, a literal one shot at fame. That same year, George and his Ace in the Hole band released his song Unwound. Unwound reached number 6 on the Hot Country Songs chart in Billboard magazine. And according to his contract with MCA, this success got him a longer contract, marking the start of his career as a professional musician with the Ace in the Hole as his band. The following year, their next song hit number 1, and from then on, George never looked back. In the next 3 years, he had 5 number 1 songs in a row. George was like an unstoppable force that had come and straight up disrupted the industry. Within 4 years of his debut, he had headlined over 20 shows and had more than 1 million fans in attendance. In 1985, he won the CMA Award for Best Male Vocalist and put out his first Greatest Hits album. That same year, his album, Something, special hit number 1 and included the hit song, The Chair. George won the CMA Vocalist of the Year again the following year and released his 4th number 1 album. However, it was in this year that tragedy struck. When tragedy struck on June 25, 1986, George's teenage daughter Jennifer lost her life in a terrible car accident south of San Marcos. Jennifer had gone out for the evening with a group of friends. An 18-year-old was driving his Ford Mustang and wanted to show off by speeding. He soon pushed his luck too far when he took a sharp corner at an extremely high speed. The car flipped over. Jennifer, who was sitting in the front passenger seat without her seatbelt fastened, was thrown out of the vehicle. She died almost instantly. The driver and the other passengers survived the crash, which made the loss even more heartbreaking for the Strait family. The tragedy was so deep for George and Norma, who probably like any parent, couldn't understand why their daughter was taken from them so suddenly. George was in court arguing how the driver responsible for Jennifer's death should be punished. The charge was later reduced to a misdemeanor. The fact that the charge was being watered down didn't sit well with George. Yet he didn't seek revenge. Instead, in his grief, he and his family poured their pain into building something meaningful. They started the Jennifer Lynn Strait Foundation in Jennifer's memory, and it focused on helping others through charitable work. Following this heartbreaking event, George completely cut off his interactions with the media, refusing interviews, and choosing not to discuss Jennifer's passing for a year. For a year, fans had no idea if they would ever hear from their beloved artist. George later explained his absence when he eventually returned, saying he got even more private after he lost his daughter and really shut things down. To deal with this tragedy, George kept making music during that 1 year and returned with 11 songs that reached #1 in a row. His musical talent was just unmatched. By the 2000s, he was releasing hits and more hits again. In 2000, his album went platinum, and that year, he received the National Medal of the Arts from President George W. Bush. A year later, he released Troubadour, which went straight to the top of the country album charts. George won 2 CMA Awards. This year, one for Album of the Year and the other for Single of the Year. In 2009, he got a Grammy Award for Troubadour. 3 years later, to the dismay of fans, George announced he was quitting touring. In late September 2012, he made the big announcement that shocked the whole music world. He said he was retiring from touring. Years of constant travel and long demanding performance schedules had worn him down, and he wanted to spend more real time with his family to end his touring days in a grand way. He created a huge farewell tour called The Cowboy Rides Away, and when his single reached #1 that same year, he had gathered 60 #1 hits. With this achievement, he beat Conway Twitty's record for the most #1 hits, passing Twitty's 40 with his new record. George now held the record for the most #1 songs by any artist in any music genre. The tour became a massive success. The final show in Arlington, Texas had over 100,000 fans. It set a new record for being the largest indoor concert in North America in 3 decades, earning well over $18 million. But what truly mattered most to George was that he shared it with his loyal band, Ace in the Hole. They had been together for over 30 years. They had remained loyal to him and he to them for years. The tour became more than a farewell. This was a celebration of a beautiful relationship. George didn't tour after that and stopped spending so much time in the recording studio too. His last musical release came in 2018. If there was a real reason George finally quit music, it boils down to age, family, and the cowboy lifestyle. One thing that fans loved about George was the fact that he wasn't just a cowboy in his songs. He lived the cowboy life for real. He spent a lot of time on his own ranch in South Texas, riding horses, raising cattle, and competing in team roping at rodeos. George shares this love of the cowboy lifestyle with his son Bubba, and George has proudly said about retirement that he enjoys doing everything with his son. He also mentioned his grandchildren. George Harvey Strait III, born in 2012, and Jillian Louise Strait, born 4 years later. Harvey has joined his grandpa on stage at the Houston Rodeo Show, where they sang together. Truth be told, fans did wish for more songs from the talented genius. However, we knew he had already given so much. He had earned the right to his privacy, enjoy life, and relax with his beautiful family.